Alright, in this section we're going to look at factoring trinomials, which trinomials just means a polynomial with three terms. Before we get into the factoring, I want us to look back at the full method, which is something we looked at previously when multiplying two binomials together. And so the full method says if you have two binomials, you want to multiply them together, so let's say x plus 2 times x plus 3. Well, then to multiply that, it's first, so x times x is x squared. And then outer, x times 3 is plus 3x. Inner, 2 times x is plus 2x. And then last is plus 2 times 3, which is 6. And then we can combine those middle terms, and we get x squared plus 5x plus 6. And so if we notice, if we look at the two binomials we started with, and we look at those last two numbers, if we was to take 2 times 3 and add them together, multiply them together, well, that would give me the 6 here. And then if we would take the 2 plus 3 and add those together instead of multiplying, that would give me the 5 in the middle there. Alright, so just keep that in mind as we go through the factoring. These two numbers multiplied to give me 6, but added to give me the 5. Alright, so now let's look at factoring this trinomial. So our goal, is we want to take this trinomial, so a squared plus 2a minus 35. And what we want to do when we factor, again, we want to break it down into two binomials that when multiplied together get me back to my trinomial. Remember, that's what factors are. They're two numbers or two terms that multiply together to give you back to your original. And so when we think back to full method, what we're doing then is we're looking for two numbers that we know, or two letters that we know that multiply to give me a squared. Well, from the previous example, we know that this is a and this is a. A times a is a squared. And now, when you do not have a number in front of the a squared term, it's a little bit easier. All we have to do is find the two numbers that multiply to give me that negative 35, as a previous example, and then add to give me 2a. And so sometimes these numbers are a little tricky, but if we think about the factors of negative 35, well, that's a 1 and 35, and notice how there's a plus sign in front of the 2a. That means your larger number, your larger factor has to be the positive. The other one obviously has to be a negative, because that's the only way we can multiply and get a negative if they're different signs. And so if we look here, negative 1 plus 35 does not give me the 2a in the middle, and so we got to think of other numbers. And so we can go all the way down to maybe 5 and 7. So 7 times negative 5 is negative 35, and then 7 minus 5 is 2. And so we found our two numbers. These are the two numbers that multiply to give me negative 35, add to give me 2. And so there's my answer. Now, it doesn't matter the order. I could have easily wrote this as a minus 5 and a plus 7 if I chose to. Remember, multiplication is commutative, so order doesn't matter. But these are your two factors. Either way you write it, those are your two factors, and that is your final answer. Alright, let's look at one more of the factoring trinomials where there's just a coefficient of 1. So again, we have c squared plus 11c plus 24. And so again, because my number in front of the c squared is a 1, I can go ahead and just write down my two binomials. And I know my first term of each has to be c and c. Now I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give me 24 and then add to give me 11. And again, if you're struggling with these, I just recommend going to the side and just writing down your two factors. So 1 and 24 doesn't work. 2 and 12 doesn't work. 3 and 8, well, there you go. 3 times 8 is 24. 3 plus 8 is 11. And so there's my two numbers. So c plus 3 and c plus 8. And again, one way you can always check your answer is to take your two binomials that you have here and fold them together, and they should get you back to where you originally started. Alright? Now, it's a little bit different when we have a number in front. So notice here, no longer do we have just a 1 in front of the square term. In this case, we have a 9. So 9m squared plus 30m plus 25. Okay, so you're going to see all kind of methods. There's several methods of factoring trinomials. I'm just going to show you my favorite one, and I think once you catch on to it, I think it'll come easy to you. All right. So now, and if you've ever heard of the AC method, this is just a version of the AC method, which says if you take this first number here in front of this square term and this last number here, and you multiply those two numbers together. Okay, so I'm going to do 9 times 25, and so when I multiply those together, 9 times 25, I get 225. Okay, and so now what we look for is we look for the two numbers that multiply to give me 225, but then add to give me that 30 in the middle there. Alright, so, this is the tricky part, is trying to find these two numbers. But again, if you're having trouble, I would just start it with your first factors and then just go through them. But what we'll find is that my two numbers that multiply to give me 225, but then add to give me 30, is 15 and 15. Okay, so there's your two numbers. So now once you find these two numbers, you're going to go back and take that number in front of the square term, so 9, and we're going to make fractions. So 9 over 15 and 9 over 15. Okay, so take that 9 and write it over each term. Now I want to try to simplify. So 9 over 15 simplifies, divide each one by 3, and that becomes 3 over 5. Divide this one by 3, and again we get 3 over 5. And so now I got my two reduced fractions. Once you have your two reduced fractions, the top number is the coefficient for your first term in your binomial. The bottom number is the coefficient for your second term in your binomial. So then this first factor just becomes 3m plus 5. And the second one is obviously the same thing, 3m plus 5. And there's my two factors. Alright, let's try one more of those. Alright, so again, notice that we have a number in front of my square term, so 28. So we got 28k squared plus 81k plus 56. Okay, so remember, anytime you have a number in front of the k squared, you can't just multiply or write out your two binomials right away. Okay, first thing we want to do is we want to multiply here. So we got 28 times 56, and 28 times 56 gives me 1,568. So kind of a large number here. Okay, so I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give me 1,568, but then add to give me that middle term of 81. And so, when you have these larger numbers, it's more difficult. What I suggest doing is just picking any two numbers that you know work and go from there. And what we know is that we know that 28 and 56, they multiply to give you that 15 and 68. Okay, so if I started with those two numbers, and then I add them together, well, that gives me an 84. And I don't need 84, I need 81. But what that tells me is I'm very close with my numbers, so I don't need to go about changing them very much. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go up on the 28. I'm going to go up to let's see, so 32. And then, my other number, therefore, would be 49. So if you do 32 times 49, okay, that gives you 1568. And then if we add these two numbers together, they do give me 81. So there's my two numbers. So see, we start out, we're really close. Alright, so now that we found those two numbers, we make our fractions. So 28 over 32, and then 28 over 49. So again, it's always that number in front of the square term over each one of those two factors that we found. Alright, so this first one reduces, divide each one by 4, and we get 7 over 8. Okay, and that's my two factors. That's my fraction for the first one. The second one, divide each one, it looks like, by 7, and that's going to give me 4 over 7. And there's my two reduced fractions. Once you have your two reduced fractions, you're ready to write up your two factors. So this first one is 7k plus 8, and the second one is 4k plus 7. And again, if you're unsure, just fold them together and make sure they get you back to where you started.